Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Collective Clicks podcast. This is your host, Brandon Bateman. Today, we're going to talk all about branded campaigns on Google. What are they? Why would you set them up? How do you set them up? What are the common misconceptions that people have around them? The best metrics to measure to know that they're performing well? And where do people end up wasting a lot of money on branded campaigns? Or even worse, wasting money on your cold traffic campaigns because your branded campaign covers up a massive problem in your account. I'm excited to see you there. All right. How are you doing today, Garrett?
Doing great. How are you?
You're doing awesome. I'm excited for our topic today. We're talking all about branded campaigns in Google Ads. And a lot of people don't even know that this is a thing, honestly. If you really think about it, that it's a thing. But if you don't, then you might not. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with what a branded campaign or let's just say branded keywords are in Google Ads, how would you describe that?
Yeah, it is a campaign where you bid on the name of your brand, on the name of your company. Pretty simple.
Yeah, it is pretty simple. So if you are Bateman Collective, this would be if somebody searches on Google for Bateman Collective, there you are. There's your branded campaign. If anybody wants to see it, just Google Bateman Collective and you might just see it. But don't click on it because that costs us money. But
Back off.
But we need a good click-through rate too for our quality score. Yeah, maybe I'm just ruining that quality score. But anyways, putting that aside, there's a lot of debate around branded campaigns, and it's one of the most weird parts of PPC, especially when you have a lot of volume. And there's people that fall generally into different camps here. Here's the elephant in the room, so to speak, when it comes to branded campaigns. They come through your PPC campaign. Your PPC campaign is their last interaction with you as a company. But I can tell you, nobody's searching for your brand online that didn't find out about you somewhere else. They must have found out about you through some other channel. There's some marketing channels that are really popular for this, like anything that generates a lot of brand awareness. Like, for example, let's just say you're cold calling and you're not saying the name of your company. How much branded search traffic is that going to generate? Really minimal, not that much. Even PPC doesn't generate that much brand recognition because it's a small group of people that actually search. But where you start to get a lot more people searching for your brand is when you're doing channels that have a larger number of impressions. So this is going to be like Facebook ads, for example. For every person that actually fills out the form, you're going to have a ton that were exposed to your brand, and they could actually end up Googling you. You're going to have like TV, radio are both the channels in this industry that, like most of our clients that do TV or radio, they have a ton of branded traffic. And these ones are especially popular. And the reason being, like, you might say a phone number on the TV ad, but people aren't going to remember it, and they're going to end up just searching for your company online. Even some of our clients that send like massive volumes of direct mail will find that there's a lot of branded traffic from that because they'll get this postcard from this company and then they'll look up the company to see if they can find some more information. But regardless, one thing you'll notice about all of that is like every lead that you generate from a branded source, it came from somewhere else beforehand. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make in their CRMs is like they use their CRM as if every lead only has one way that it came to us, which isn't exactly true. I think the way to mark those leads in your CRM is either as the original channel with PPC being like a secondary channel that helped get the lead, or just ignore PPC altogether, but then throw the PPC spend with it. It's a weird situation because I think on average, PPC takes too much credit for branded leads.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's so easy to get caught in the addiction of branded traffic where those leads are so cheap that you start to overvalue their true worth because, like you said, you've already paid for that traffic, most likely in other ways, and but by paying for it twice on paid search, there's a balancing game of would I have gotten this traffic regardless of me having that branded ad on Google or not. And so you have to do some testing to see where the marginal gain is with your branded campaigns.
Yeah. And you and I haven't actually talked about how we do this and how we determine what can you pay for a branded campaign. So I'm curious to see how our opinions differ. I can tell you my opinion of the ultimate way to do this is to do a conversion lift test. But you just can't do it in this industry. But to explain like how, like I know there's a famous study done on eBay where eBay did a branded conversion lift test on Google. And basically what they do is they basically say every other day we're going to run a branded campaign, and we're going to do that for a period of 3 months or whatever the case is. And what we're monitoring is basically every time you turn on your PPC, you're going to find that you get less organic search, because if you don't have a PPC ad there, then you're still going to show up most likely for your brand organically. If you don't show up for your brand organically, then PPC is like one of your biggest opportunities to show up really quickly for your brand organically. But most companies will show up for their brand organically. So what they notice is like every time you turn on the PPC, your organic traffic plummets and your paid traffic goes up. And you can eventually measure, if we turn on the PPC, then it increases the likelihood of the traffic coming to us by whatever percent, because you have to recognize that a certain percentage of your traffic you get through PPC was going to come in organically anyways. The problem is, if you're eBay, you can do that. If you're just like whatever wholesaler in whatever market that gets much less branded traffic than eBay does, you might be running that experiment for 3 years. And all the while, every experiment that you run has a bad side that's not working as well. So you have to make some smarter judgments as to how you want to value the branded traffic. And it's not always black and white. But the assumption that I use in my head, there's a couple of things that I'll look at. The first one is, are there other people bidding on our brand in our market? Because if there was theoretically nobody bidding on your brand, then a branded ad is not really necessary, because the main thing you want to protect from is other people showing up above you for your own brand, especially on mobile devices where they might have to, the seller might have to scroll a long way to find your ad. And then the other thing I do outside of that is I just assume that the branded cost per lead is about 4 times what it shows in platform. And the reason for that is I just use this basic assumption of like 75% of the people probably would have found you anyways. It's a random assumption. I don't actually have like great data for it, but it helps me understand that if I'm paying $100 per lead on a branded campaign, in my mind, I want to think of that probably as closer to $400, because 3 out of 4 leads would have found me anyways.
Yeah, I look at it in a very similar way. I look at branded campaign as essentially like, how much of the real estate do I own versus how hard is it to keep that real estate. If I have great SEO, there is no reason to run a branded campaign, assuming that there aren't a large number of other people bidding on my branded terms. And likewise, if I have bad SEO, but there's no one bidding on my terms, then again, I probably will rank high still. And then the third thing I look at is the quality of who is bidding on my terms. If they're a business that I know I can beat on service or quality, or they're not a true peer, or they're not in market, I'm not worried about them being on top, because I know that they're not a true threat. So those are the things that I look at as who's bidding on it, how many people are bidding on it, and then how's my SEO. And then with those 3 things, I kind of use that to gauge how aggressively to bid on branded.
Yeah, and when it comes to SEO, what you basically want to look for is, if somebody searches for your brand name, do you show up on the Google business profile and on the website, number 1. So you could have like really weak SEO across many keywords if you at least have your brand, which having your brand is pretty easy. If you just launched a website today, you might not rank for your brand. But most people without significant SEO investment can eventually rank for their brand, just because you're actually the most relevant thing for that search. So Google's going to actually try to get you there. I can tell you one time where this gets a little bit tricky is when we have brands that are a little bit more generic, which is very common in this space. I'll give the example of, we even have one client that had 2 brands. They, for anonymity purpose, I won't share like every like detail, but they had one of their brands was like sell to, and then the person's name that owned the company. Their other brand was insert the location home buyer that they were in, right? So they had these like 2 separate brands, and they did a lot of direct mail in one of them, and then they did a lot of TV for the other one. And the issue that we ran branded campaigns for both of those. What we found for this particular client, and this is true generally across other things, is when they had a name like, for example, Utah home buyers, Texas home buyers, Houston home buyers, whatever it was, they would naturally get a lot of competition on the brand just by basically existing, because we have keywords, for example, like hint for anybody looking at this, we just did the analysis of all of our ad groups by lead quality, and home buyers is actually our best, which I never would have expected. But home buyers has just over 11 leads per contract across our clients right now. So you're targeting keywords like home buyers, and then somebody searches for Utah home buyers, and then there you have other people that aren't even trying to bid on your brand, and they're bidding on your brand because your brand is generic enough that it's really similar. Versus if you have the brand that's sell to Garrett, for example, then if I'm your competitor and I want to bid on your brand, I actually have to think about it. I'm not going to like naturally show up for it when I wasn't trying. I probably have to add a keyword specifically for that. And if I haven't done that, then I'm not going to be bidding on that term. So it's naturally a lot less competitive. So in that situation, like we found that for this client, it would cost them like 4 or 5 times more to cover their brand for their more generic brand versus their brand that was a little bit less likely to match to keywords that people would normally be using. So that's something to think about, like both when you're naming your company and then also in terms of could a branded campaign be worth it for you? Are you going to run into that issue where everybody competes on your brand, even if they're not trying to? Because there's two types of branded competition. There's like me saying, Garrett buys houses, he's really good. I'm going to go after him. I'm going to put a branded ad on his terms. And then there's just, I see Garrett buys houses popping up in my search terms, and I wasn't even trying to bid on that. That's a totally different situation.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's key to check the auction insights on your campaigns to see which domains are actually in there, because often like that overlap is caused by just that other business having a bad manager doing their PPC, and it's not even like a true threat. So that's a tip right there, is to see who's bidding on your terms. There's a report in your account called Auction Insights where you can see the domain as well as how often you overlap with them, how often they rank above you, how often you are above them, and lots of helpful metrics to see how much of a threat they are and how that's changed over time.
Yeah, totally agreed. To share a horror story, to talk about like the dark side of branded campaigns on Google. I just did an audit with a company recently. And what they tell me basically is like, yeah, we've been working with this PPC company for about 2 years, and we get consistently like a 3 to 5x return on investment. So I'm like, okay, cool. But they're like, well, worried like things aren't working as well recently. Okay, I look in the account, try to figure out what's going on. And basically what I find is they are spending about 25% of their budget on branded campaigns, which that by itself is no problem. The real issue here is that like the vast majority of the leads in the account are coming from their branded campaigns. That's the thing that I get most concerned about. And then not just that, I look at all the unbranded campaigns. Remember, these are the ones that are spending 75% of the budget. So I look in there, and the search terms there are garbage. They've got like all the worst search terms you could ever imagine in there. So they have like really low conversion rates because of that, and they have very few leads coming from it. But when they do have those leads, you look at the search terms that those leads are on, and it's all stuff where I'm like, this is not at all a motivated seller. They're not going to convert over 2 years. So anyways, you have the discussion with the client. They start trying to break things down in their CRM. What they find is that, I can't remember exactly what the result is, but over this long period of time, they've had essentially extremely minimal results from 75% of their budget that went to the unbranded stuff. And for this company, I think they were spending close to 15 or 20 grand altogether. So they were wasting 10 or 15 grand a month on these cold traffic campaigns, and then they spend about $5 a month on this branded campaign that actually produced all of their results. Although then when you use that rule of thumb of mine of, okay, maybe 75% of the traffic would have found you otherwise, obviously looking into some of the things that we talked about here could give you a better idea of where that could be. But you look at that and you say, okay, they have a 4x return, for example, even on the branded stuff. It's really just a 1x return because a lot of it was going to find you anyways. So basically they've been just wasting money on PPC for years without even realizing where that money was going. And it's actually a really common thing to find in this industry.
How do you do that? That is just crazy to me, to waste that much money over that much time and just completely mismanaging your account.
But
that sucks.
But I think the big thing is it all comes down to what goes into internal dashboards. Because in their internal dashboard, they just have PPC, right? And what they see, it's simple, right?
Cost, clicks, leads.
Yeah, and then deals and revenue. And they're just like, the revenue is greater than the cost, so it must be fine. But it's not that simple, because you have to figure out, like, every PPC campaign has things that are working better in it, things that are working worse in it. But the trick about branded is it's just like a lot of that stuff you would have gotten anyways. So that's what makes it really tricky. But it feels like we're just like bagging on branded campaigns. I do think there's a lot to be said for where they belong, as long as you measure them right and you make sure you're getting the value out of them. Like, branded campaigns, you do have to think, especially if someone's on a mobile device, if somebody's searching for your company and they have to scroll below the fold through 4 other listings to just find your organic listing. What's the likelihood that either they're not going to go to your organic listing, or if they do, they end up reaching out to one of those other companies as well, when maybe they wouldn't have otherwise? So maybe you even still get the same lead, but now you have more competition on the lead. There's a real value to being there unbranded. You just have to make sure you're measuring it properly and you're paying the right amount of money for it. Let's talk about the best practices for doing that, though. Like, how do you get the best results out of a branded campaign? Do you do it differently than you would with non-branded?
It depends a lot on the level of competition of your branded terms. For me, if there's high competition, I'll just do just my usual bidding for a target cost per acquisition, to not get caught into a bidding war where I'm always having to bid higher and higher to keep my spot on these terms, where I don't have to bid that high to get that click in general, but I'm in this war with this investor to own my terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there is that battle, I'll just set a maximum cost per click or a maximum cost per lead that I'll pay for that campaign. If that isn't the case, I'll just set a target share of impressions where I want to rank this high this often, and then have Google just bid where it needs to make sure I own that share of the real estate of those terms.
Yeah, totally understood. And that second strategy that you noted, it's my favorite, but you're right that it doesn't work if it's too competitive. Like, we had a client where we started going that direction and we got to 10 grand a month in branded spend and only 50% impression share. Is this really the game that we're playing?
Yeah.
Like, it's just not worth it. If you're paying anywhere close to the same price per lead on a branded campaign as you are in non-branded, like, you're losing money. And there's this ego component to it, like, I gotta maintain my real estate there on Google. But you can't justify paying $400 for a lead that was going to find you anyways if you pay $300 for leads that are like net new to your business. So yeah, I would skew towards like the second thing that you mentioned. Like, that's like my go-to. And then if that doesn't work for whatever reason, if it's too competitive, too expensive, then we'd go to a target CPA model, just like you mentioned. Usually the way that we'll explain this to clients is the best way to deal with branded campaigns is to have a flexible budget. If you have a specific amount that you're trying to spend, then you'll get screwed with a branded campaign. And the reason that happens is you don't want to end up spending more than what you have to. So if you use what's called the target impression share bid strategy, you could basically tell Google, I want to bid whatever it takes to be on the top, but put a couple constraints on it. One, I'm not willing to pay more than X dollars per click. Sometimes we'll put something in there, 50 or $100, just to like weed out like our most expensive of our clicks, which are not worth it. And then 2, you have your monthly budget. So what I tend to recommend to people, you'll find a lot of brands, especially if you have more of a unique brand, you could put like $1,000 a month for the budget in there. And then you actually only end up spending $250 or $400 or whatever the case is to cover the brand, and you get really cheap traffic from it. So those are the situations where branded works great. But you don't want to make your agency feel like they got to spend $1,000 on branded. It's more, what am I willing to pay to show up all the time? Call it $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, and just put that as the cap. But then make the objective, let's make this as cheap as it could possibly be while maximizing our impression share, which couldn't be different from the strategy that we use for different types of traffic, because it only works if you have a really low competition type of term.
Yeah. And one thing, just as we were talking, is when a different brand gets a lead for someone else's brand, those actually don't perform super great. And so it's important to not have this fear of, oh, if I lose this lead that wanted me, then I'm going to lose like market share, or they're going to like go to these other guys and I'll lose that lead. But most likely, they just didn't realize that they clicked on the wrong ad, and they'll come back to you organically. It's easy to get caught in this scarcity mindset of I have to get everyone looking for me or I'll lose the business.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how it actually like performs in reality, because people don't just get tricked by like a bait and switch. Oh wait, I thought that was you and now I gave you my house. Odds are you'll still get that business even if you lost that one auction battle, one time.
Yeah, it's where there's a price to it, right? Because yeah, does it matter? Yes. Is it the only thing that matters? No. Would I be willing to pay any amount of money to make sure I get every single click? I would not. Yeah, on that topic, just random situation where that might not be true. One time in this industry, I saw somebody created a website called opendoor.com, but the O was a 0 instead of an O. And they started like bidding on Open Door's branded terms, which for anyone listening is definitely trademark infringement. But I guess if you could pretend you're the other company, maybe there's something there. But yeah, competitor campaigns are like a whole other thing for us to talk about. But yeah, if we're focusing on branded, I totally agree with everything that you said. Yeah, I'd say the only other things that you really want to focus on for your branded campaigns, like the key metrics, it's going to be what's your cost per lead, what's your impression share. Those are the big things. You want a really low cost per lead and you want to ideally maximize your impression share. But yeah, we have to live in the world of reality. The tricky thing that happens with branded though sometimes is like you put your agency in a position where if they were to raise your branded budgets, if you're measuring them based on how many deals come from branded and unbranded versus the ad spend, it's always going to be in their best interest to raise branded budgets beyond a point that it works for you, because that would maximize their PPC revenue while minimizing your overall company revenue. Which I know this is like a weird concept to think of. There's a world where we decrease PPC revenue and simultaneously increase overall company revenue with a certain move. The only other thing I'd say in terms of structuring it, what I would do by default, let's just say you don't get much branded traffic, which ultimately a lot of our clients don't. I would just throw branded in its own ad group in a campaign, because you don't want to have a separate budget dedicated to it and possibly take away from your main campaign. It won't get that much traffic anyways. And I would check in on it like once every while and see, are we getting a lot of traction there or something like that. And I would give it like a really low, like the way that we do it is we do a TCPA bid strategy for our campaigns, and then we have different bids per ad group. I would give it a really low bid compared to everything else. Then you don't have to have multiple campaigns. Yet you can still see how it performs independently and make sure you're covering your brand at a lower cost when those opportunities arise. I'd say that's a good strategy if you just don't have that much branded traffic at all. Once you start to get it heavier into channels like TV and radio, or like you send a massive amount of direct mail, or you have a heavy Facebook ads budget or something like, that's where I start to think, do we need a separate branded campaign? And it's clear in the account when it's necessary. You'll start to see that you start to get a lot of branded traffic, and it tells you that it's time to start going that direction.
I like it.
Cool. All right. Thank you everybody for listening. Hope you learned something here, and I will see you next time.